Well, I've been working on this series about lifestyle factors and how they might help or hurt our multiple sclerosis, our quality of life. I wonder if I were to ask Dr. Gavin Giovannoni what he thought about that, what would he say?
There's also all the non-MS things, the brain health arm that can be adopted by people with the disease to try and slow down the smoldering disease. So the lifestyle factors, exercise, diet, sleep, smoking, comorbidities, recurrent infections, certain medications, social determinants of health, anti-aging strategies, and adoption of wellness practice. So there's lots that can be done. I think every person with MS should be told that there are things they can do themselves. Why wouldn't you want to tell them?
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 38 years. I played that clip from a recent MS selfie by Professor G because I wanted to let you know that we're not wasting our time by trying to improve our general health. It may very well help our multiple sclerosis. We've looked at supplements, we've looked at nutrition, we've looked at bone health, we've looked at blood pressure, and we've looked at sleep. We might as well look at stress, because that's a big one. Whether you have MS or not, stress can really wreck your health. But today we're just going to look a little bit more at stress, maybe make some observations or insights, maybe discover some things that we didn't know. Let's go ahead and look at a few things, and you can let me know in the comments if any of this is helpful to you or rings true, but let's go ahead and get started. Well, I thought it would be fun to look at some images that try to talk about the downward spiral that we get into when we have a stressor, because I think that is what happens, that you get a stress and then the way you react to it sometimes can create more stress and more stress and more stress. And it's just interesting to see how these are represented in graphical form. I'm kind of fond of graphics, so let's just see. Here's the first one. And it starts with a stressor at the top there. And then the first thing that happens is what they call attentional narrowing. So your attention narrows. You may have had a million things on your mind, but when a stressor hits you, your attention just focuses down to that stress. You're just focusing on that. So you've narrowed your attention. So then if you go down a little bit more on the cycle over on the left, you appraise the stress and you try to figure out, is this something that is a real threat or what? And then usually you allow that stress to become a bigger threat than perhaps it even is. And you go back down the next level and it says negative emotions and increased stress. So your reaction to that stress creates negative emotions, which in turn increase your stress. So now on the left, you see you're now sensitized to that particular threat so that the next time you see that threat or you encounter it, you're already pre-programmed to react badly to it because you've already determined that it's a threat and it creates negative emotions. So then you go back down to the other side on the right, your attention narrows again. And then over there on the next, it's like new stress appraisal. So now you're going to look at it and you're going to create an even bigger negative reaction toward it. And then over on the other side, you're back to negative emotions and increased stress. So that's kind of a repeat. As you can see, this just keeps cycling down and down and down. If you don't catch it, you can make this stress become so overwhelming that you kind of can't do anything positive in response. And what ends up happening, of course, if you have a chronic illness like multiple sclerosis, it's definitely going to affect that. It can't not affect it. Another one I found was actually looking at pain, and that's a video that I guess I should make sometime because I haven't really talked a lot about pain. Pain that comes from something other than multiple sclerosis can still affect your multiple sclerosis. So if we start with the 12 o'clock there, you have a pain of some kind, and I'm going to assume it's a pretty serious pain. It gets your attention, kind of like that graphic we just looked at. It gets your attention. You have attentional narrowing. And you can certainly relate to that, because when you have a serious pain, you're not really able to think of much else. So then because of the pain, you now have muscle tension from the pain. That's a natural instinctive reaction. But as you see, that will cause stress. And then from there, you've got isolation and withdrawal, and then you become depressed. And depression involves a loss of self-esteem, or it certainly can. And then you go from there to disability, and then immobilization, and then more pain, and then more muscle tension, and more stress, and more isolation, and depression, and then more loss of self-esteem, and more disability. So as you can see, this is a cycle as well. I have to say, I'm a little confused about these arrows. Maybe what they're just trying to tell you is it's bidirectional. You could start with pain and go down the other way. You could say pain leads to immobilization, which leads to disability, because if you're not moving, you're going to become more disabled. And then that causes a loss of self-esteem, which makes you depressed, causes you to withdraw and become isolated, increases your stress, and then that in turn increases the muscle tension, which increases your pain. So actually going down the clockwise direction makes more sense to me. But I think it is important that the arrows indicate it is a bi-directional thing. You can start anywhere on this chart, really, and you may wind up in the same place, this cycle that only gets worse unless you can do something about it. And then this last one, it's a little different. It doesn't represent it as a cycle. It's more of a steps, maybe going down a path that you don't really want to go. You start with an unpleasant life event, maybe multiple sclerosis diagnosis. Well, from there, you could certainly see where that might lead to depression, anxiety, and stress. And then from there, you would start having physical effects. And if you remember the last one with the circle, the bidirectional circle, the physical effects could happen as a result of the stress, or the stress could cause the physical effects. And then after that, you've got, they say, less physical and social activities. I'm going to rant. It seems like the word fewer has disappeared from our vocabulary, and I really think that what they mean here is fewer physical and social activities. But hey, who am I to blow against the wind? That's what the graphic says. And then finally after that, the mood gets worse. So it is kind of a spiral in a way, because your mood is going to get worse. The way you've reacted now to the unpleasant life event, you've had all of these interim stages, but once your mood gets worse, that itself becomes an unpleasant life event, which increases your stress, which increases the physical effects, which increases, or decreases, I should say, your physical and social activities, and then your mood will get even worse. So this is a problem that you don't want to let get too far out of hand before you do something, or you're going to be really miserable. And your MS isn't going to do very well with that either. Well, there are a lot of articles, as it turns out, on the relationship between stress and multiple sclerosis. I found this one particularly interesting. It covers a number of factors: resilience, stress, well-being, and sleep quality in multiple sclerosis. This study comes out of Israel, and they're looking at folks who live in Israel. And if you follow the news at all, you know that it's not the most stress-free environment these days, what with all the wars and skirmishes and unsettling events going on in that part of the world. Let's take a look just at part of this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but of course I will be putting the link down below, and I do encourage you to go out and check this out. It was published in December of 2023 in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, which is, of course, a peer-reviewed journal, very reputable. You can get this for free as well, which is always very nice. I'll just read this abstract for you, and then you can see where they are going with it. Under background, they say that multiple sclerosis is a chronic progressive immune-mediated disorder that affects the central nervous system and is the most common cause of non-traumatic neurological disability in young adults. Now, you probably knew most of that, but were you aware that it is the most common cause of non-traumatic neurological disability in young adults? I wasn't sure that I was, but now I am, and now you are too. The study aimed to assess the levels of stress, resilience, and well-being, sleep quality, and fatigue in Israeli people with multiple sclerosis, and to examine the associations between these factors and the socio-demographic and clinical characteristics. These factors had never before been studied in conjunction in persons with multiple sclerosis, nor had they been systematically addressed in Israel. The unique geopolitical situation of which may pose unique challenges. I'd say not just may, but definitely would. Okay, and then their methods are as follows. This was a survey-based cross-sectional study conducted through an internet platform. The results are that Israeli persons with multiple sclerosis who participated in the study were experiencing relatively high levels of stress and low resilience, poor sleep quality, and severe fatigue. The analysis revealed significant association between resilience and stress, well-being, and anxiety, as well as stress and well-being, resilience, sleep quality, fatigue, and clinically isolated syndrome. And as you remember, clinically isolated syndrome is when it's too early to diagnose that you have MS, but you're showing something on brain scans that is consistent with an ultimate diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Their conclusions are as follows. The Israeli persons with MS who participated in the study were experiencing higher levels of stress, lower resilience, and worse sleep quality than persons with MS in other countries, as compared to results previously reported in literature. The findings of this study ought to serve as a call to action for the MS care providers in Israel and warrant further research into the possible causes of the phenomenon and strategies to address it. So, what is interesting to me about this study, among many things, is that what we see is a lifestyle factor that does not seem immediately related to multiple sclerosis can worsen the multiple sclerosis, and for all we know, even start it in the first place. Not that it causes MS. As we know, MS is a combination of genetic and environmental factors not clearly understood. But you can't get MS from having stress. But if you're in a stressful situation, it can certainly bring the MS out of its sort of quiescent state and make it more obvious to you. Perhaps you've had MS for years and never realized it because you just never encountered the kinds of stressors that brought it to the surface. But this certainly could do that. I also am reminded of a video I made a while back, and I will link to it below, about how the traumas that you might have suffered in your childhood can lead to chronic illness later on. There are two very good books on that subject. One is called When the Body Says No, and the other one is The Body Keeps the Score, both of which are very interesting, and one of the two even has a chapter specifically about multiple sclerosis. So I will link that down below. But I think this is a really valuable study because it is beyond question that the people in this study live with chronic stress, not just acute stress, the kinds of traumas that many of us experience when something happens, like a car accident or injury or something, a thing that happens quickly, and the worst of it is over, and then it's the recovery part that might take a long time, but the worst is over. Whereas this kind of trauma goes on and on and on. There's a degree of uncertainty and fear that can set in, and I think that could be very damaging to a person's multiple sclerosis. Now, in this article from Very Well Health, which is called The Link Between Stress and MS, A Plan for Coping with Stress Will Help You Live Better with This Disease. This came out in 2020. But again, it will reiterate the importance of managing the stress that you might be having in your life because it will have an effect on your multiple sclerosis. It says here, not only is MS physically overwhelming, the effort it takes to live with and manage the disease is taxing and can cause emotional stress. Some of the practical consequences of MS, like missing work or getting behind on important tasks, can make you feel overwhelmed as well. The article goes on to say that while experts suggest that stress can contribute to MS exacerbations, there is also some evidence that the disease itself causes physiological changes that manifest as stress, for example, tension and nervousness. And they talk about the stress of living with MS. Here are other concerns that people with MS face that factor into the stress of living with MS. The unpredictable nature of MS, adapting to new symptoms, having to care for your children while not feeling well, needing help from others, having less quality time with friends and family, multiple healthcare providers' appointments, concerns with health insurance, paying for medications, and concerns about your job. So, as you can see, MS increases inflammation, which can cause stress, and stress can also cause inflammation. So again, you've got yourself a vicious circle. It says here that stress has long been associated with MS exacerbations. It isn't completely clear whether stress actually causes exacerbations or whether you may become more anxious than usual because of the physical changes that occur before an exacerbation has its peak impact. So either way, though, stress is not going to be a positive factor in your life. But there are stress reduction strategies you'll be happy to know. It says that stress and anxiety can take a toll on your life, but there are many ways of coping with stress if you have MS. The key is to give yourself permission to get the help you need. We've talked about that in other videos, and I'm glad they're reiterating it here because we have to be able to reach out to a support network, friends, family, medical professionals, whoever you need. But someone has to be there for you. And if you don't already have that kind of support structure, it's probably a thing to make a priority. Here's their nice little graphic. They're fond of doing these, and it's kind of nice because it gives a summary. You've got positive coping skills that you need to develop. Relaxation, we've talked about that in other videos. The importance of just being able to relax and not be all stressed out and have your mind full of things that can just cause you to be miserable. The social support is in the middle, as it should be, because I think it is the basis for a good quality life, is to have some feeling that you're connected to other people in the world and that they care about you. And planning, of course, it's very important to just have a strategy for how you're going to deal with a certain thing so that when it happens, you're not overwhelmed. And then maintaining relationships, which to me is kind of the same thing as social support, but they've got them as two different things here. Maybe because it is doubly important that we make sure we're connected to others in the world and aren't trying to do everything on our own.
You can't let the stress over things you cannot control affect your health.
I was declining so quickly, but doctors had said that that's a no-brainer. The combination of the stress and the MS occurring just put me into a wheelchair inevitably.
Life comes with stress. I think that when I cannot cope or adapt with it or move along with it, that it does exacerbate a lot of my symptoms. I don't want to eliminate stress from my life. I want to learn how to manage the stress within reason. Even from waking up in the morning and making my bed, having a system, being organized, it minimizes my stress.
So one of the things I actually started doing this year, in fact, is what I call my 5 happy things. And every day I had to come up with 5 things that made me happy. And they could range from small things like blueberries to, bigger things. The beautiful thing I love about that is that every time I encounter those things again or think about it, it makes me happy and it makes me smile. So that sort of defeats the stress.
I believe that when I'm in stressful situations, exercise has really helped me to manage my stress. Also, having a good support system. I don't know what I would do without a really solid support system. Being in nature helps me. And maintaining a calendar or a schedule, which is prioritizing things.
Everything in life is mind over matter. So if you can keep your head strong, you can keep your body strong. Stay positive and realize that you can't change the fact that you've been diagnosed with MS, but inevitably you're gonna have lifestyle modifications, and you can either let that upset you that you can't live the way you once did, or you can find positive ways to embrace your new hobbies and habits. This disease really is mind over matter and about staying positive, because positivity can heal the body.
And here's how they conclude the article. Stress is an inevitability of life, and even more so with MS. Don't ignore the fact that stress may intensify the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. Be kind to yourself. Taking care of your health means acknowledging the impact that MS has on your emotions, and also being careful to help prevent stress from worsening the symptoms of your MS. And I would definitely agree with everything that's been said here. Stress to me is one of the worst things for my MS. Like I showed you in some of the graphics above, it's a vicious circle. Stress makes my MS symptoms worse, which in turn make my stress worse, and it can go on and on and on if I don't do something to catch it before it gets too bad. And the people around me, I have to say that they ought to get an award for patience, because sometimes I don't catch it before it gets kind of bad, and then I'm really not that much fun to be around. If you have strategies for dealing with stress, I think that the rest of us would benefit greatly from you sharing them. So please leave a comment down below. We will be very, very grateful for that. Well, I hope you thought that was interesting. I certainly did. It was very interesting to see that study from Israel that shows that the trauma that they're living with all the time has really made a significant difference in their multiple sclerosis. And even though the traumas you may be facing may not be anywhere near as dire as some of what they're going through, it will still slowly but surely make a difference in your quality of life and in the course of your progression in MS. But that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this series. And if there are other things that you would like me to tell more about, let me know, and I would be very happy to look into it for you and come up with another video. In the meantime, take really good care of yourself. I'll see you again in my next video.